Welcome to the Neurokrish Immersion. We are in the Many Faces of Freedom, Season 2, and in this episode, we consider Sri Ramana Maharshi and his freedom through stillness and vichara. Sri Ramana, he does represent to us the liberated archetype. It was a quiet afternoon in Madurai, an ordinary afternoon. A teenage boy sits alone in his uncle's house. Not ill, not doing any spiritual practice. And suddenly, without warning, a thought strikes him with absolute certainty. I am about to die. Instead of running, he lies down. He stiffens his limbs. He holds his breath. And he watches. And what happens, he would say later. The body was dead, but I was still here. This was not philosophy. This was a direct perception, what he saw in that circumstance. What if death happens and the one you thought you were does not go with it, is the radical question that we have to ask ourselves. After that afternoon, Sri Ramana did not proclaim enlightenment. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything changed. He simply lost interest in school, in ambition, in fear. Death had already happened. What was there to worry about? What was left? Years earlier, the name Arunachala had stirred him. He believed it was not a place, but a divine state. And when he learned one day that it actually existed on earth, he was stunned. 6 weeks after the death experience, he proclaimed, I am going in search of my father. And 54 years he remained at Arunachala. He would never leave. He would never leave the name that had always called him. At Arunachala, Sri Ramana did not become a teacher, certainly not in the first instance. Instead, he disappeared. He sat in underground vaults and caves. Insects ate into his flesh. He ignored hunger. He did not respond. Others fed him. They protected him. To modernize this entire experience is frightening. For a clinician like me, it makes me think of catatonic states where people are still and inaccessible to the outside world. And it should make us very worried. But what happened? There was nothing romantic about this. It was not practice. It was a nervous system in which the self has collapsed and never rebooted. Some wonder whether Sri Ramana had seizures, whether he had a dissociative event. And I have addressed this in some detail in the podcast on seizures and spiritual seekers. These are legitimate questions. But usually, just like we spoke about in Sri Ramakrishna, when these instances happen, it leads to a collapse. But what followed here was very different. Permanent clarity, loss of egoic doership, a stable stillness. Whatever the spark, the fire never went out. There was one occasion where Sri Ramana collapsed, and again I have described this entire circumstance in detail in the Seizures and Spiritual Seeker podcast. His breathing stopped The body became cold. Those around him wept, believing he had died. But his awareness continued. Again, the body was absent, but awareness was present. Ask ourselves the question, if awareness does not leave when the body fails, what exactly are we? When Ramana eventually engaged with people, he made no claims. There was no teaching persona. There was no attempt at charisma. There was just stillness. And the neural insight that we get was that his default mode activity remained quiet and the narrative self never reassembled. It was Sri Ramana who introduced the central theme of vichara. So, what is vichara? Vichara is not thinking. It's not contemplation. It's not analysis. It's a pointer, not a puzzle. The question, who am I, was not meant to be answered. Instead, one turns attention towards the sense of I, and vichara is watching that sense of I dissolve. Let's contrast that with meditation. In meditation, we use effort. Vichara removes effort. Meditation cultivates a certain state of mind. Vichara reveals what remains. Meditation builds concentration. Vichara is what is revealed when states fall away. In meditation, we seek experiences. Vichara points to the experiencer. The method of achieving freedom, we've spoken about the Buddha in an earlier podcast, and we've spoken about meditation and the monk's brain in earlier podcasts. That's one method. Vichara, where you remove effort, you reveal what remains, you see what remains when states fall away, and it points to the experiencer. That is another way of achieving freedom. When Sri Ramana's mother came to live with him, his austerity softened. He cooked, he cleaned, he cared for her. In this circumstance, freedom was not retreat. It remained in activity. And I have spoken about in the past how mindfulness is not just inactivity or meditation. Mindfulness also exists in simple everyday activities that we practice. It is the state of sahaja samadhi, the natural state, freedom that needs no special conditions. When people came to visit Sri Ramana, they expected teachings. What they encountered often was silence. Yet, it has been reported that in Sri Ramana's presence, thoughts slowed, anxiety softened. Freedom here was not taught, it was caught. Paul Brunton, the British journalist who introduced Sri Ramana to the West, wrote extensively about experiencing this transmission, how merely sitting in Sri Ramana's presence brought a natural quieting of the mind. Sri Ramana was affected by cancer, and when it came, he refused aggressive treatment. This body itself is a disease, is what he is reported to have said. And as devotees wept, he said gently, "Where could I go?" What Sri Ramana teaches us is that freedom may arise not through effort, not through surrender, not through longing, but when the self collapses and is never rebuilt. There are different paths, different nervous systems, but there's one freedom. The question is not which path is superior. The question is which doorway fits you. Are you seeking freedom? Or could it be that what you are seeking is already here, waiting for the seeker to fall silent? Sri Ramana Maharshi represents the liberated archetype of freedom. If you like what we do here at the Neurokrish Immersion, please subscribe and share. We are on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. Thank you so much.